That was a quick one. Good morning. You guys got me? Yeah. Hey, in the same way that Katie goes barefoot, this is why I wear flip-flops. Jesus wore Bethlehem Cruisers, and so I wear Bethlehem Cruisers. Hang on, I got something hanging on my Bethlehem. Maybe. Okay, all right. Glad to have you guys with us. Hey, if you're checking us out in-house for the first time, thank you so much. We're honored to have you with us in-house. If you're checking us out online, again, thanks for being a part of what we're doing. We love having you here, and we hope that you feel welcome, whether you're a first-time guest or whether you've been with us since the beginning. Okay, we're in the second part of a series that's called "I Love Jesus, but I Like to Get Even a Little." And we named it that because you can't name things like "I'd like to throat punch them," but that would make Jesus happy. You can't you can name series like that, but we chose not to name it like that. We don't want to insinuate violence or anything. But one of the things that we talk about here a lot when we get together and when we worship and when we kind of break open God's Word is the idea is that we want to do life better. And part of doing life better is making us better at life, meaning that taking relationships, taking finances, taking a certain amount of things, dynamics of our lives. And sometimes in order to do life better, you have to unlearn some things that you have been taught throughout life, right? Okay, I know I'm starting off heavy right from the beginning. Yeah, stay with me. Get another sip of coffee and wake up. But the idea is that sometimes you have to unlearn things, and sometimes you have to learn new things. And so when we talk about how to deal with difficult people, most of the time we're talking about we don't want to be those difficult people. But in this particular series, we're kind of looking at people. What do you do when you have people in your life that are difficult people? And I'm not pointing any fingers or anything, but you understand what I'm talking about. People that are just they're narcissistic, or they're mean-spirited. They're hard to get along with. They're just they're deceptive. They're users. They manipulate you with time. They manipulate you with money. They manipulate you with your children. They manipulate certain things in your life. You know. Now I'm talking about these are difficult people. Now I'm not talking about like physical abuse or sexual abuse. That's not difficult. That's criminal. Okay, so if you're going through something like that, that's not difficult. That's criminal. You need to get help, and we're here to help you if that's what's part of it. But I'm talking about difficult people in your life. What do you do that? Because we talked about this last week when we introduced this whole subject matter, is that there's this idea that if we're not careful and if you're not proactive, meaning that if you don't know what you're going to do before you get there, before you meet those difficult people in your life, then what happens is difficult people, if we're not careful, they can take a certain measure of control over our lives, can't they? Meaning that they can turn you into something that you're not. You find yourself going, and then you end up doing things or thinking things because difficult people in our lives, if we're not careful, they can throw us off balance, can't they? Because you don't know how to react to them. You don't know what they're going to say next. You don't know where they're coming from or what kind of mood they're going to be in today. You just don't know. So they have a tendency to throw you off balance. So one of the things we talked about last week, and we're going to finish it up this week, is this. It's good to know how you're going to treat it before you get into it. How are you going to handle this situation when I have to deal with my boss, or when I have to deal with my ex-wife, or when I have to deal with my ex-husband, or when I have to deal with that particular person in my family, when I have to deal with that neighbor, or that classmate, or that coworker? Here's how I'm going to choose to handle it. Now, I gave you an example last week about when Hannah was in elementary school. She ran into a problem. She came home crying one day, and as a dad, there's two things you don't want to ever see in your life. One's your wife crying, and the other one's your little baby girl. Because there's a problem switch that switches off in every man where you go, okay, gloves are off. I don't care if you're used in third grade, the blood's raw. But what happened is she was, this picking kind of turned into bullying, and then it turned into something totally different. And so we were sitting here as parents. You're like, what do? You meet with the principal, you meet with teachers, you meet with it, but then they take certain measures, and then you come back and it just starts all over again. And it seems like you're in this revolving door, and every time you drop your daughter off at school, every time you drop your kid off at school, it seems like you're on a roulette wheel. You just don't know what you're going to get this time around. So when we were going through all that, we had some crazy thoughts that kind of came in our mind, because it was like this little boy, I'm going to call him Derek to protect the innocent, it was like he moved in with us at our house, right? And it was like, well, what did Derek do today? Is Hannah okay today? All right, what's happening today? And it's like it totally threw everything off. And, I told you this last week, Lisa had this crazy idea of hiring some 8th grade boys to go talk to this Derek kid on the playground. They're just going to talk a little bit. And I had to talk her off the ledge. You can't do that, honey. You can't do that, Okay, that was really my idea. But it's like difficult people, they throw us off balance, don't they? And they end up living rent-free in these 3 little inches. All right, my head's bigger than most, so maybe 4 inches, but don't say it. But it throws us off. And here's what happens. The golden rule, right, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, it gets thrown out the window. And what happens is the iron rule comes into effect. Do unto others as you want to do unto them. Right? That's kind of the iron rule, is that I'm gonna pay you back with what you pay me back. And so the question becomes this, and this is what we left. What do you do with that? Because I think most of our normal responses is something like this. We go, well, just ignore them. If you just ignore them, they'll go away, they'll get off on somebody else, and blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't work, does it? Because you ignore them, and they keep chirping, and they keep chirping, and it keeps building up, and it keeps building up, and you start gritting your teeth every time you get around them, and then all of a sudden it all pulls up, and you go medieval on them, and you just tell them off, and you just, you end up being somebody you're not. Again, throwing you off balance, and they end up gaining a certain measure of control over you. So, ignoring them doesn't work. The other one that we talked about last week was this idea about you just go, well, they deserve this, so I'm going to give it to them. And so you pay them back even for even. But what that does is it leaves you on the same level with somebody that you don't like to begin with. So that's not a viable option either. It leaves you at the end of the day, when you rested your head on the pillow, you're going, I can't believe I did that again. I blew up at them, I told them off, So what do you do with that? Well, there's this third option that we began to look at last week. Jesus models this throughout the New Testament, but there's also a story that emerges from the Old Testament in the most unlikely of places, and it comes from the most unlikely of sources. And it's a woman by the name of Abigail. And I love this story in the Old Testament because so many times throughout the Bible, women aren't the heroes. But in this particular story, a woman is the hero. And I dig that. I like that idea. I like that kind of change of pace a little bit. But there's this woman by the name of Abigail. And Abigail's life intersects with David. It's almost a backstory. If you're not really familiar with it, you may not even know the story. But it's a backstory of David. David at this particular time, he's a fugitive from Saul. We all know the story of David when he's about 14, 15 years old. He faces off in the valley of Elah against Goliath. He ends up killing Goliath, and David ends up being this national hero. And he starts to gain popularity. He starts to gain fame. And in that, Saul says, I better keep David close to me, because you know the old story, you keep your friends close, you keep your enemies closer. And you keep those movers and shakers kind of closer too, because David's fame, he's a star on the rise, and he's kind of rising, so Saul's keeping him close. But then Saul realizes something, that David's popularity at this particular time has outgrown Saul's. Well, if you're a king, that's a problem. Because now you have this young bird, you have this young buck that's up and coming, and not only is he threatening your throne, he's threatening your son's throne. He's threatening your dynasty. And so Saul tries to kill David multiple times, and David ends up being a fugitive. He runs from Saul, and in the course of all this, he gains other people that are around him. He gains other men that have a problem with Saul too. So David has all this angst. He has all this anger. He has all of this pent-up frustration at Saul, because Saul at this particular time, he's untouchable. You can't touch him. So Saul gathers all these malcontents, these discontents around him, and there's about 600 of these men that are traipsing around the wilderness. Some of them have their families with them. It's a ragtag bunch. And they all have anger issues, it seems like. Okay? Well, that's not a good thing. Right? So we introduced this story. I want to run through the part of the story for those of y'all that didn't get it last week, or if you didn't see it on Facebook. We're going to run through it, and I'm going to recap it, and then we're just going to talk about what God's got for the rest of them. Okay? So here's how the story started off. A certain man in Moab who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. To which us we go, so, why would you want that many goats? But in an agriculture society, you're like filthy rich. You're rolling in it. And what's happening is he was shearing in Carmel, meaning this was payday. All right, this is when the rich get richer. They have all these goats. Now they're getting ready to shear them and get all this wool. They're going to sell all this wool. They're going to make tons of money. Right, so they hear, so here's what's happening. So let's go on. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his deeds. He was a Calebite, meaning that he was descendant of Caleb. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So David knew what was going on. He was like, this guy's rich is getting ready to get richer. So there's a backstory to this, and it'll get introduced to us. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. To which is exactly what they did. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time that they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. So what David is saying is, while they were out in the wilderness, and Nabal had all his shepherds watching all of his sheep, because he couldn't watch them by himself, all that number of sheep, David's men were in that area, and they were giving him protection. And he's saying, at this particular time, nothing went missing, nothing went stolen. We didn't help ourselves to some leg of lambs. Right? We didn't get any goat burgers. Right, I don't know if you ever had goat burgers, but they're good. Yeah, they are. We had them when we were in Africa, man. You get them to fix that, they're good. But he's like, but listen, we didn't take anything, we didn't steal anything, we didn't let anybody else steal your stuff either. We were like a wall of protection around you. And so, how about a little something, something for the effort? Right, Nabal? How about a little something, something? Which is normal. Which would be a normal request. Ask your own servants is what they said. And they will tell you, therefore be favorable toward my men. Since we come at a festive time, meaning that this is a big time, this is payday, this is like the annual report, things are going great, okay, for you. You're getting ready to get a whole lot richer, so why not share some of the love? Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. Nabal's answered David's servants, he says, who is this guy, David? And who is this son of Jesse? Meaning that he knew David. He knew that David's father's name was Jesse, so he knew David. This is just an insult. He's just saying, who do you think you are, coming here at this particular time, demanding things from me? All right, servants are breaking away from their masters all these days, meaning that you're just a rebellious lot. You're breaking away from Saul, and now you're trying to fleece me. No pun intended. I'm working hard up here, people. I'm working hard. What should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shears and give it to men coming from who knows where? I don't even know where you're coming from next. I'm not giving you a morsel of bread. I'm not giving you any water. I'm not doing any of that. David's men turned around and went back, and when they arrived, they reported every stinking word. This is important because what it does is it says when you're a messenger, you have to report every word because if something happens on the tail end of that, which is going to, then you don't want to be responsible for lying to the man and having that be essentially blood on your hands. So you report every word that was said. So when David hears it, you can imagine his response. David said to his men, each of you strap on your sword. We're going to get ready to be strapped. Anybody catch that? Okay. No more urban references. So they did. And David strapped his own as well. And 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with their supplies. Meaning this, this is getting ready to be the very definition of overkill. 400 men to go visit a guy and probably his 20 or 30 servants who aren't warriors. This is going to be a slaughter. And I said last week, and I think it's worth mentioning again, many historians, and myself included, believe this was the first time the phrase, you mess with the bull, you get the horns, was uttered. Again. No pun intended. You're welcome. You got to stay on your toes in here, people. David, here, so you can imagine the picture here. David has got his sword, and this is the sword that he had gotten from who? From Goliath, right? So this sword should have been a reminder to David that, hey, you don't need to take matters into your own hand. God's provided for you in one of the biggest times of your life. God provided for you. God gave you everything you needed. You trusted in God to handle that situation, and God came through. That sword, when he looks down at that, that should be a reminder. But David's not seeing it. He just sees it's just, because listen, we're like that too, aren't we? When you get kind of mad and when you get angry and you're building up a head of steam, and you're just talking to yourself and you're just going, I cannot believe that this happened. I mean, you don't see things that you really should when we're angry and when we're vengeful and when we're thinking the iron rule. Do unto others as they did unto you. I'm going to get even. Because you know what? They deserve it. They deserve it. You start those conversations in your head, don't you? Oh, come on. It's not just me that hears voices either. All right, David had just said, and here's what David's saying to himself. It's been useless. It's been useless. Tried to help this chump. Been useless. Now he's going to get what's coming to him. Now he's all of my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. All of that time I spent doing that, all of the money, all of the resources, everything I did to help them out. And they just throw it back in my face. This is what you get when you're nice to people. We've all uttered those words before, right? Hang on, can you go back just a second? Thank you. So that nothing he has paid me back evil for good. So now I'm getting ready to pay him back the same thing. I love this next line. Here's what he says. May God deal with David. Now this is David talking in his head. Now have you ever been so mad that you talk about yourself in the third person? Yeah. Like, yeah. Oh yeah? They miss some Scott? They go get some Scott. Ain't that Scott? That's Scott. You ain't no chump. You better square up. You better blow up. I'm getting ready to get swallowed. Right? I mean, you know he's mad. When he's talking, and get this, he's not just talking, he's talking to himself in the third person, and then he's answering himself in the third person. Now that's mad. You're like over the top, having that conversation going on the road. You done messed with Scott. Now you get Scott. Tell me Scott. They go get Scott. They mess with Scott up in here. They gonna have Scott splattered everywhere up in here with this officer. Ain't that right, Scott? Yeah. You tell him, Scott. I mean, he's basically talking to himself in the third person. This tells you the level of how mad he is. And he's even bringing God into the conversation. You ever done that?
Yeah. I'll say yeah.
Lord help me. Lord, I'm telling you, Lord help me. It's just only like neck bones. Be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave any of them chunks alive, I leave anybody alive in that whole camp, one male of all who belong to him, I'm going to slaughter them all. And we know this, David could do it. It was well within his capability to do it. David, at this particular point in his life, is a very violent man. He is not somebody to be trifled with. And this guy has trifled with him. And now he's getting ready to meet a force of reckoning. So what happens here, we'll pause in the story, is one of Nabal's servants goes up to Abigail, his wife, and says, Abigail, here's the issue. And this is probably was commonplace because Nabal was a difficult man to deal with. So what a lot of his servants probably did was they probably went to his wife. Because if you want things done, you get his wife. So, because they're like, he's hard to deal with, he's difficult, he's surly, he's mean, he's unruly, you don't know ever what's going to come out of his mouth, so just go to Abigail, she can get things done. So they go, listen, here's what happened. David sent some of his men to your husband, and you weren't around, and Nabal offended them, and told them off, basically. But here's the deal. I was there in the wilderness, and David's men were straight up. I mean, they handled everything great. Nothing went missing. They protected us. They were like a wall of protection around us. And part of the profit that you're going to reap in, or part of the profit that Nabal's going to reap in, is due to David. But he blew them off, and he insulted them. So Abigail goes, okay, here's what we're going to do. So Abigail gathers up all of her servants, and she tells them this, and here's how the rest of the story goes. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, which these would be like whole goat skins. Okay? It's a long one. Which you would probably need it. To get down all this food. Loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep. I don't even know how the sheep stay still that long to get them dressed, but again, 5 sales of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. Raisins were hard to come by. Figs, and loaded them on donkey. It speaks of the wealth that Nabal had. So what she does is she basically she assembles all this food and she loads them up on donkeys. You ever heard of food trucks? These are food donkeys. And she's like, here's what you do. Load up all this food, because we got all these men to feed. Load up all this food, and let's send it. And she goes, let's send it on its way. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, because the donkeys are slow carrying all that food, all these food trucks, right? Go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Okay? Now, here's what happens. I love this part of the story. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David. All right, David's got all his men. They're barreling down down at Carmel, and he's pumping himself up. He's building himself up in his head. He's having these conversations. This has been useless. Yeah, here we go. I'm getting ready to. We're getting ready to go into action. And so David and his men were descending upon her, and she met them. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you something what happens here. This throws David totally off. Right? Now remember, Abigail's a beautiful woman. She's a beautiful woman, and she's got a bunch of food. Those are 2 out of the 3 things that God has loved. You guess what the third one is, right? So it like totally throws David off, right? He's like, what? I mean, listen, ladies, let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you a little secret. This is crucial. If you're getting ready to get married, or you're single, or you're a newlywed, if you ever have a husband that's mad, just feed him. You feed him, he probably won't be mad after that. We're pretty simple creatures. You know, you're like, you mad, huh? You want a cheeseburger? Yeah, I will. Is it you got any bacon to put on that? Yeah, okay. All right, I'm happy. So, you ever had this happen? So Abigail's coming out of her being, beautiful woman, got all this food with her, and she runs into David, who's got a head full of steam. All right, and here's what happens. The first thing that she does here is she falls prostrate onto the ground. She quickly got off of her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She basically apologized. You ever had anybody do that? You're mad, oh man, you're fired up, you're going to give somebody the what for, and you're going to rip their head off, metaphorically speaking, in a verbal confrontation, and then all of a sudden they come out and say they're sorry. Before you ever say anything, you're like, I don't know what to do now. I'm all confused. What should I do now? Because I'm still mad. And I've got all this anger, and I've got all this stuff that's going on. What do I do with that? Now, David is totally thrown off by all of this. It just goes to show you how a kind word can soothe Savage heart. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my Lord. Pardon me. And let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say." And David's like, "Well, you got all this food. You look good. Okay. All right, go ahead. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool. From this point on, that's what everybody would call Nabal. They would say, "Hey man, don't be Nabaling around here." Somebody got that. And Folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men. She said, I didn't see the men that were coming. You know, if I would have been there, things probably would have went down differently, but I didn't see all those men that showed up. And now, my Lord, as surely as your Lord God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed, and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who intend on harming my Lord be like Nabal. And then she goes on. And let this gift which your servant brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow him. And she goes on one more time. What she does right here is absolutely a stroke of genius. Listen, when they said she was beautiful, that was one thing, but they said she was intelligent, and this shows. She goes, "Please forgive your servant's presumption." Meaning, what I'm getting ready to say here, it may be presumptuous. Ladies, this is like a Jedi mind trick, what she's getting ready to do here. And this will work on your husband, or on your girl, or on your boyfriend, or on somebody. Even if we know it's getting ready to happen, right? Even if the guy knows it's getting ready to happen, this works is so highly effective. All right? Here's what she does. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord. Meaning she's speaking about David's future. Right? She's saying, just in the brief time that I've known you, or the time that I've heard your story, the time that I heard your name, I know the favor of God is with you. And you're going to do great things. Now, she goes, because you fight the Lord's battles, and there is no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. And David's like, "Really?" This is like, ladies, this is like you saying something like this. "Honey, you are so awesome with the kids." You're so patient with them. You're just awesome. And you know, the guy's like, all right? Yeah. And your planning abilities, oh, you just plan. I know you're going to plan a great trip for our anniversary and my birthday. I know you will because you're so good at it. And the guy's like, I am. That's right. Hey, you let me handle the trip around this, right? All right? It's like a Jedi mind trick. Like, you're not looking for these droids, are you? No, we're not looking for these. And it's like, honey, when the one time you used the vacuum cleaner, you did an awesome job. It was so incredible. And you're like, I did. Hang on, honey, let me have that vacuum cleaner. I did it. And honey, you don't know this, but you would be so happy doing the laundry while you watch football, wouldn't you? I think I would. Yeah. Let me do the laundry today, baby. Okay. I mean, that's basically what Abigail's doing. She said, listen, this is important. She said, I want you to look at your past and how God always came through for you. And then I want you to look at it, and just as God has come through there, God's going to come through in the future. Because here's what she says after this, and this is brilliant. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, she's talking about King Saul, she's saying, even though you would be justified to a certain degree, even in your mind, when you're trying to convince yourself that, you know, Nabal did me wrong, but David realized that part of his angst, part of his anger was really directed at Saul. Isn't that how it happens sometimes with us? If you don't resolve something in your past that had to do with difficult people, your mom, your dad, an uncle, a boss, a sibling, then it has the effect sometimes we have the tendency to take it out on other people. This is just what David's getting ready to do. And so she references that. She says, listen, even though all this is happening in your life, you've been done wrong. You've been given a bad shake. You've been dealt a bad hand in life. Even though all that's happened, she says, the life of my Lord, meaning the life of David, will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. Meaning this, basically, God's got you in his hip pocket. He's looked out for you. He's protected you. He's even though you're on the run and things don't look like right now, even though somebody did you wrong right here, God still has you. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. Now, as soon as she said sling, where did that take David back to? So smart. Brilliant. Because he automatically thinks, 15 years old, walking down into the valley of Elah, facing a 9-foot behemoth. And God took care of me. God protected me. I was able to trust God. And now I can trust God now too. To do the right thing. When the Lord has fulfilled my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel. She goes on, my Lord will not have on his own conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord, your God, has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. What she's saying right here is what we all need to tell ourselves. How do you want your story told? When you go back and you tell your friends, and you will, or your wife, or your husband, well, I dealt with so-and-so today, dealt with little Derek today. When you tell that story, how do you want that story to go? Do you want to just end up even with them? With somebody you may not even like? Or do you want that story to be a totally different story? And this is what Abigail is bringing to David's mind right here. She's saying, how do you want this story told? When you think about it, How do you want it to go down? How do you want people to remember you when you dealt with difficult people? That's what she's saying. So David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. And then he goes on to say, may you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. You thought this through. You gave me sound advice and great advice, and now I'm going to take it. And I'm not going to harm Nabal, and I'm not going to harm anybody in his household. So the story, it kind of pans out. And I want to leave you with this thought process this morning. And then I'm going to tell you how Hannah's story ended up. When we come to the characters in this story, Nabal is maniacal, meaning that he's uncertain. He has a tendency to be given to his temper, to his emotions. He can become violent, mean, surly. Do you want to be remembered as a Nabal, returning evil for good? David is predictable. He's like every one of us in this story, isn't he? It's easy when you've been done wrong to say, I'm going to pay back even for even. I'm going to get even. I mean, that's predictable, because I think that's the kind of behavior that all of us would exhibit to some degree, because it's the iron rule and not the golden rule. But Abigail, oh man, Abigail is remarkable. She's remarkable. She steadies the situation. She doesn't let emotion get the best of her. She doesn't give in to the temptation of evil for evil, returning evil for evil. She says, I want to replace good for evil. Because when the story gets told, I want the story to be good. So, back to Hannah's thing. When we were dealing with this school, and I don't want to make anybody out to be a villain, because that's not the whole part of this story. But we went round and round and round with this, and I was trying to figure out how long we were around with it. I thought 8 or 9 months, but Lisa said it was more than that. What we were talking about with this school situation and the bullying thing, and we went round. So we finally just said, you know what? We're just going to remove ourselves from the situation. We're just, rather than get drawn in and sucked in and continue to be a part of this. Listen, you need to understand something when we talk about relationships. If you allow the person that's dysfunctional in the relationship to make the rules, then don't be surprised when you have a dysfunctional relationship. Okay? So, for us, it was like we're just going to remove ourselves from the situation. Listen, I don't blame the school now. I did then. And I held a lot of animosity. So here's what we did. We removed Hannah from that situation, from that school. We put her in another school. It took some sacrifice on our parts, but we said, you know what? This is for our daughter's well-being, and we're just going to do this. Okay? But here's the problem. Every time I drop by that school, I thought to myself, I'm just going to let my truck run off the road and run right over their sign. Not hurting anybody. Hey, don't look at me like that. You know, some people think the same thing. Well, so, and I don't even know if I even told Lisa this. She's getting ready to find out. We had gotten a financial gift from somebody. We get those occasionally when you're in the ministry because people feel sorry for you. No, it's because people love you. They're like, man, you have to do them all of us. Here's some money. I wish it was more. Trust me. I wish it was. But we got a financial gift, and I remember right then. I remember as soon as we got it, I remember the Holy Spirit said, you need to run that down there to that school and just give it to them. I went, I know I ain't hearing from God on that. I mean, that's got to be the devil right there. Not like God, I'm going to go back a lot. And that's why I started talking in third person again. Scott ain't doing that. Scott, how are you, Scott? You don't be doing that. So, but as soon as as that thought came in, I was like, you're right. You're right. So I drove down there, tried to check over, handed it to the school, and I said, listen, I know that my daughter doesn't go to school anymore, but do with this whatever you want to. It's our gift, our family's gift to the school. Thanks for everything you did to sow into our daughter, and for giving her a great experience on the last 8 months. I said, no, thank you. You see, here's the reason why I think God had to do it. I had to do that for me. I had to do it for me. I had to do it so that every time I drove out there, I didn't want to return evil for evil. I wanted to replace good for evil. Not that I think that's so evil, I don't. But you know what I mean? It's like I wanted to replace good for bad. I didn't want my last memory of that place to be bad and to be negative and to be hateful. When I thought about it, just for me, I wanted the story to go something like this. It's a good place. Okay. And with all the relationships and all the interactions we have with people, life's too short, man. It's just, I just refuse. The older I get, the more I realize I'm not going to let mean people have control over me. I'm just not. I'm not going to let it happen. I'm going to try my best to be nice and to try to do the right thing and to replace good. I wonder what our world and our society and our cultures would start to look like if people who call themselves Christians, followers of Jesus now, because here's the thing, you and I, we were given grace.
Yes.
Not on your best day, but on your worst day. For Christ Jesus died for us while we were still yet sinners. You've been given grace. It is our duty, out of love for Jesus, to extend grace and the benefit of the doubt to others. To not replace evil for evil, but to give good for evil. Is it hard? You better believe it. But anything worth having is worth fighting for. And when you get to tell your story, it'll be a story where you replace evil with good. I left you with 3 questions last week. I want to run by you again and give you something to think about this week, okay? Here they are. Do you want to be even with someone who's difficult or mean? Is that where you want to leave the school? That's up for you. The other one is, wouldn't you rather be ahead than just even? And the last one, what story do you want to tell? What do you want your story to be? Because it's in those times, isn't it, when people are watching. And when you know that you know. Join me as we go to the Lord in prayer. Father, in the name of Jesus, I pray, Lord, in the midst, it is tough. It is so tough to not go there sometimes with people that are being difficult. But Lord, we see this shining example in Christ Jesus. This shining example of love and grace and mercy. And Lord, it's amazing to see how much an apology can go, how far it can go. How when we choose to be proactive and know what we're going to do before we get there, when we choose to honor you in the midst of these things, and to honor your love and your grace, the same love and grace that has been extended to us into the lives of others, it tells a beautiful story of redemption and glory of Jesus Christ.